My 4-year-old daughter is missing, but everyone in town insists she never existed, including my husband.
A disheveled and anxious young woman burst into the police station. "Ma'am, please calm down," I whispered, motioning for her to sit down. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" The young woman took a deep breath and shakily sat down in the chair opposite me. Her eyes were red, clearly from crying.
My name is Sarah Williams.
She began hoarsely.
My daughter Emily disappeared last night. But when I asked my neighbors and my husband for help, they all said they had never seen Emily. They even said I never had a child.
I frowned. "Mrs. Williams, this is indeed a troubling situation. Can you tell me more about Emily? How old is she?"
She's 4.
Sarah said urgently.
She has golden curls and big blue eyes. She's always wearing that pink bunny pajamas.
At this point, Sarah's voice choked up and tears welled up in her eyes again. "When was the last time you saw Emily? Can you describe what happened then?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying hard to recall.
Last night, I read her a bedtime story as usual, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. But this morning...
Her voice trembled again.
This morning when I went to wake her up, her room was empty. There was no sign that anyone had even slept in the bed.
My frown deepened. "Mrs. Williams, you mentioned that your husband also denies Emily's existence. Can you tell me more about your husband?" Sarah shook her head.
I don't understand, officer. I really don't understand. John, my husband, he's always been a good father. But this morning, when I frantically told him Emily was missing, he looked at me like I was crazy. He said we never had a child. He even said I might need to see a doctor, that something might be wrong with my mind.
Sarah's voice trembled, and tears streamed down her cheeks. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm and rational. "We will do everything we can to help you find Emily. First, we need to confirm some basic information. Can you provide Emily's birth date and any medical records?" Sarah nodded vigorously, and from her bag, she took out some documents with trembling hands and handed them to me.
This is Emily's birth certificate and some of her photos.
I quickly flipped through the documents and turned to Mary, my assistant assigned by my superior, to retrieve the relevant records. Mary nodded and quickly left the office to carry out the task. She soon returned, her face solemn.
"Sheriff Tom, I've checked all the records, but there is no one named Emily."
Sarah turned pale, her eyes filled with fear and despair.
This can't be. She really exists. She's my daughter.
I frowned, realizing the situation was more complicated than I had anticipated. "Ma'am, please stay calm. We won't give up. Whatever the truth is, we will find out." At that moment, the office door swung open and a tall man walked in. He looked very tired, with a hint of anger and confusion in his eyes. It was Sarah's husband, John Williams.
John, why are you here?
Sarah asked in surprise. John walked over to Sarah, his tone somewhat stern.
"Sarah, you need to face reality. We've never had a child."
She's our daughter. How can you say that?
Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face again. I raised my hand to signal them to calm down. "Mr. Williams, please explain the situation in detail. We need more information to help your wife." John sighed and sat down.
"Officer, I've tried my best. Since last night, Sarah has been insisting she has a daughter, but the truth is, we've never had children. We've been married for 7 years, and we've never had a child."
I nodded, noting his statement, then turned to Sarah. "Sarah, we will continue to investigate. Can you take us to your house and show us Emily's room?" Sarah nodded vigorously, her eyes still glistening with a glimmer of hope despite the tears blurring her vision. The three of us left the police station and drove to the Williams house. In the car, Sarah kept describing Emily's room, mentioning her favorite toys and books. John remained silent, his face somber. When we arrived at the house, Sarah rushed upstairs and opened a door.
This is Emily's room.
She said excitedly. John and I followed her in, but what we saw was an empty room with no bed, no toys, and no trace of a child. Sarah stood frozen, disbelief in her eyes.
No, last night this was Emily's room.
John sighed and gently put his arm around her shoulders.
"Sarah, I know you're in pain, but we have to face reality."
I walked to the center of the room, carefully observing every corner, trying to find any possible clues. Suddenly, I noticed a photo on the floor. I picked up the photo, and it was of a little girl, exactly as Sarah had described Emily. She was smiling brightly, wearing those pink bunny pajamas. Sarah, is this your photo? I handed the photo to her. Sarah took the photo, and tears welled up in her eyes again.
Yes, this is Emily.
John's face darkened further.
Sarah, this is a photo of you when you were a child.
Sarah was stunned, looking closely at the little girl in the photo. Her hands began to tremble.
No, I never took this photo.
She murmured, tears once again streaming down her cheeks. After a brief attempt to console Sarah, I had to leave. After all, there were other matters at the police station that required my attention. The next day, although it was the weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about the case. I returned to the police station and wanted to talk to Mary about it. Mary, I walked into her office. I want to talk to you about the Williams case. Mary looked up, frowning.
The Williams case? What are you talking about?
I was taken aback. The case of Sarah Williams and her missing daughter, Emily. Mary looked at me with a puzzled expression.
Tom, we haven't received any reports about a missing little girl this week. Are you kidding me?
I realized things were becoming even more strange. Without wasting any more time, I hurriedly drove to John and Sarah's house again. After knocking on the door, John opened it, with a hint of confusion on his face.
Officer, what can I do for you?
John, I need to talk to Sarah, I said urgently. I have some unresolved questions. John's frown deepened.
Sarah? Who is Sarah?
Your wife.
I've never been married, officer. I don't even have a girlfriend.
I forced myself to stay calm, carefully observing John's expression, but he showed no signs of lying. John, are you sure you've never had a wife? I asked, unwilling to give up. John nodded.
Officer, I don't know what you're talking about, but I really don't have a wife. Are you sure you haven't got the wrong person?
Without saying more, I turned and left. In the car, my mind was in a whirlwind. What had happened? Why was everyone denying the existence of Emily and Sarah? I decided to go back to the police station and review all the clues again. However, when I returned, I found there was no record of the case on my desk. Even my notebook was blank, as if none of it had ever happened. Mary, has anyone touched my notebook? Mary. I turned around, and the police station was empty, eerily quiet. My heart was filled with unease. Unexplainable events kept happening one after another, making me question my memory and sense of reality. I decided to leave the police station for now, go home, and try to clear my head. On the drive back home, Sarah and Emily's faces kept flashing in my mind, along with that empty room and John's puzzled expression. What was going on? Why was everyone denying their existence? And why had the police records vanished? When I arrived at my front door, exhausted, all I wanted was to open the door and retreat to the familiar comfort of my home. But no matter how I turned the key, the lock wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door, my anxiety and unease growing stronger. Just then, my elderly neighbor, who had heard the commotion, came out. She had been my neighbor for years, and we had always gotten along well. Ma'am, did I disturb you? My lock seems to be broken. I can't open the door. She looked at me with a wary and unfamiliar expression.
Who are you? Why are you trying to open Tom's door?
I was stunned. Ma'am Yum Tom. The old woman studied me with a complex expression. Just then, the door opened, and a stranger who looked somewhat like me, but was definitely not me, appeared. The old woman immediately smiled warmly, the way she usually did with me.
Tom, you're home.
The stranger also glanced at me, his eyes filled with a hint of confusion and wariness. Good evening, ma'am. Who is this?
He says he is Tom.
The old woman looked at me with a guarded expression. My mind was in chaos, unable to comprehend what was happening. Why was this stranger living in my house, using my name, and why did the neighbor seem so familiar with him? Who are you? Why are you living in my house? I demanded angrily. The man calmly looked at me. Sir, are you sure you haven't mistaken the place? This is my house. I suggest you leave, or I'll call the police. Everything was falling apart. I realized things were far more complicated than I had imagined. The situation in front of me filled me with an overwhelming sense of strangeness and fear. Okay, I'll leave, I said reluctantly, turning to head back to my car. I needed to calm down and rethink. No matter what, I had to find out the truth. Driving away, I decided to find a place to stay temporarily. I had a vague feeling that something was wrong with this town. I drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town and planned to settle down there for the time being. After entering the room, I locked the door and sat on the bed, trying to clear my mind. Suddenly, my phone received a text message from an unknown number. If you want to know what happened, come to the abandoned archive room on the east side of town at 10 p.m. tonight. Although I didn't know who it was from, I decided to go to the archive room as instructed. After all, it was the only clue I had at the moment. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and what I saw was a wall covered with headshots of people. Emily, Sarah, Mary, the elderly neighbor, even the police chief. And right in the center was a photo of me. I walked in step by step, carefully examining each photo. Below the photos were some notes, detailing each person's habits, daily routines, and even some private details. Clearly, someone had been closely monitoring us. As I was lost in thought, the lights in the archive room flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. A few seconds later, the lights came back on, and I noticed a door in the corner that I hadn't seen before. I cautiously approached the door. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading underground. Just as I was debating whether to go down, a hand suddenly covered my mouth from behind, and I felt a sharp pain. A strange smell quickly filled my nostrils. I struggled to break free, but my consciousness quickly began to blur, and my limbs became weak. Eventually, I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, I found myself in a confined room with metal walls all around. I struggled to stand up, but my hands and feet were tightly bound. In the room, besides me, were several large, transparent pods, each containing a person. Squinting, I saw that they were all familiar faces. Sarah, Emily, Mary. I tried to break free, but the restraints were very strong, making it impossible to escape.
You're awake, Officer Tom.
A familiar voice came from behind. John, wearing a white lab coat, emerged from behind. His friendly smile made me shiver. John slowly approached my face, holding a scalpel and tracing it along my face.
You know, Tom,
He said quietly,
your organs, especially your heart and liver, are highly sought after on the market. Don't worry, it will be over soon.